Hello friends and welcome to Smartcoach. Today's topic is 1857. We will talk about the revolt today. Now all of you who are acquainted with the civil service examinations, both state civil service examinations and UPSC, you would have an idea that the revolt of 1857 is quite a hot topic. Even this year in UPSC mains, GS paper 1, there was a question about 1857. The question asked how we can say that the 1857 revolt was a continuation of the smaller and bigger peasant revolt or popular revolts all across India in the previous 100 years of British rule. We will deal with that question in the end of this video. We will deal with it briefly, but today's video will be concerning the causes of the revolt of 1857. Now, as far as causes go, whenever we are analyzing any historical events, what you have to keep in mind is that there are always three primary gradations of causality whenever we talk about any kind of historical events. These are economic, political, and social. One more thing. If you are looking at a catastrophic event, if you are looking at a sudden event that occurred in history, you will often find associated with these economic, political and social causes, you will find an immediate cause. The immediate cause is often an abstraction. Remember, it is often an abstraction of the first three gradations of causes that we already talked about: the economic, the political and the social causes. So the immediate cause will often be an abstraction of all three gradations of causes. Now, if you are looking into the revolt of 1857, what you have to remember is that whenever you are talking about causes, you can segregate the causes based upon these gradations. Now, let us take the economic first. If you look at the economic causality of the revolt of 1857, first thing that you will find is exploitation, economic exploitation of India. This you can say belongs to, or you can say is characterized by drain of wealth as well as the revenue settlement. Revenue settlements that came into being with the establishment of British power over India. Remember, till about 1858, what we see is that British power in India is established by a mercantile company, and the prime motive of this mercantile company is profit, and therefore they go to extreme lengths in order to accrue this profit and in order to profit from their enterprise in India. And drain of wealth, revenue settlements are the primary measures or primary ways in which this company profits from India. When you talk about the revenue settlements, it is directly related with the revolt of 1857. You see, the zamindari settlement, which was instituted in Bengal after Bengal came into the possession of the British, the Mahalwari settlement and the Rayatwari settlement, all three of these settlements, revenue settlement systems, were exploitative in nature. They not only exploited the Indian countryside economically, but they were also responsible for fundamentally changing the composition, the social composition of the Indian countryside. Therefore, you see, these revenue settlements are linked very deeply and inherently with the revolt of 1857. What we see is that of all of these revenue settlement systems, the zamindari system had the most impact because the zamindari system was a very grossly exploitative system of revenue settlement. The revenue demand of the state was fixed at the maximum possible level, all right, and the zamindari settlement did not just or was not just exploitative to the peasantry, it was also exploitative to the zamindari classes of Indian society in Bengal, what we see is that the peasantry were demanded very exorbitant revenues. They were stripped of their rights over land. But then, of course, the zamindars who were to pay this revenue to the state, the zamindars were also not spared. Why? Because if you fail or failure to pay the revenue to the British state, timely, would mean that your land would be confiscated, you will be evicted from your land, and the land would lapse into the British state, and then the British state has the authority to auction off this land to the highest bidder. Highest bidders, of course, come from mostly the money lending classes, mostly the classes from the urban society. And when they move into this rural society, what we see is that rural society, its social composition completely changes over time. Now, the Mahalwari and the Rayatwari system, they were also not very lenient system. The revenue demands in Mahalwari and Rayatwari were also very high. What we see as a result of these revenue settlement system is persistent famine, and especially the impoverishment of the rural countryside. We see the growth of the influence of moneylenders who became the last recourse of a starving peasantry in order to wear them through this very tough times. All right, so the revenue settlements are very, very important when we are talking about the causality of the revolt of 1857. They come under the economic branch. All right, and the revenue settlements were not the only way in which the British government, the East India Company's government in India, exploited India. They went about with various other economic enterprises. They went about searching for markets in India and dispossession of India of its raw material, processing it in England, and then bringing back the same raw material in India and selling it in Indian markets. All right, extreme competition for the Indian industry, by that I mean a very undefined sector at that point of time, but a sector nonetheless. All right, and this competition ate up at the domestic industry, especially the handloom industry, and it completely destroyed, obliterated the handloom industry in India over time. All right, so in economic causality you can talk about that. Now let us move into the political. Now, when we look at the political causality, we will have to look at the East India Company's treatment of native states. All right. Native states and native rulers were very grossly mistreated by the East India Company, and they did not even spare the Emperor of India, Bahadur Shah Zafar. All right. By the time of the revolt of 1857, Bahadur Shah Zafar was a mere pauper. He did not have any true power, and he was under the protection of the British, and not just the protection, he was under the domination of the British state in India. But that aside, we can see certain policies such as that of subsidiary alliance, then the doctrine of lapse, Now, these political systems were devised in such a way so as to, establish British paramountcy over native Indian states, so as to convince the native Indian states or bring them to a state whereby they would be obligated to the British East India Company's political power in India. By subsidiary alliance, once you come into an alliance with the East India Company state, that means that you lose most of your foreign powers, you also surrender your economic powers, you most often have to deal with the exorbitant demands of the East India Company state. And as far as the doctrine of lapse, most of you know that when a ruler dies without a legitimate issue, his empire or his territories lapse into the British state. Now, these were very exploitative, politically very exploitative systems. By the doctrine of lapse itself, we can see many states were annexed, states such as Satara, Udaipur, more importantly, Jhansi. Now, these are just some of the examples whereby the doctrine of lapse was applied, and these states were lapsed into the East India Company state in India. All right, and this was of course bound to cause a recalcitrant effect. Effect was that of political animosity between the native states and the British East India Company state in India. And it is not just about the, animosity between the native states and the rulers of these native states and the British government, but also a kind of nostalgic reaction among the subject population of these native states. These native states have been under the rule of these rulers for such a long duration that when British government is or the British rule is established upon these states, there would be, of course, a nostalgic reaction, a reaction for the times that have passed, all right, a yearning for the times that have passed, and to re-establish these earlier dynasties into these territories. And these reactions also play very importantly when we come across or when we are talking about the leadership of the revolt. You see, most of these native states, a very pertinent example is the Rani of Jhansi. These rulers were held by the subject population. These rulers were actively provided support by the subject population because the subject population did not want to have anything to do with the British state, all right. They just wanted to go back to the previous times, and this was the nostalgic reaction that was provoked by these kind of political systems, all right. So this is also a very important cause of the revolt of 1857, all right. Now let us look at the social causes. Now, when we are talking about the social causes of the revolt of 1857, what you must understand is that the establishment of company government in India, it changed, fundamentally changed the the Indian social fabric. All right, what do I mean by that? You see, older systems with which, social systems that is, with which Indian subject populace had been well acquainted with, these were fundamentally changed by the British East India Company's government in India. Such things as courts, all right, arbitration, which were based upon social ties, all right, communal ties. They were made completely impersonal. Now this might be a little bit, you can say, impersonal, all right. It was not, of course, impersonal. There is always a layer of racialism, all right, when it comes to adjudication under the East India Company's government. But what I can assure you is that such systems as the adjudicature or the judiciary within East India Company state was very different from what was going on previously to the establishment of British power, all right. Such systems were previously based upon social ties, kinship ties, ties of communal sentiments, all right. But now all of these social systems have been dissolved, and an impersonal system based upon foreign laws have been placed, all right, have been placed upon or have been forced upon the subject population. The subject populace does not understand these new systems, all right, and therefore they want to again go back to this older times, this nostalgic reaction, all right. This is at the deepest level. Changes like this in the social fabric, and here you will also I must remind you, you will have to tie down judicature or judiciary with society also. Now this is not an easy task, but if you try to understand, you would grasp the importance of these kind of establishment of these kind of foreign systems over a native society which does not understand this system, all right. So these are at the very deepest, the very fundamental level of the reaction that was provoked by the revolt of 1857. But then, of course, you can talk about certain surface stuff, all right, and they are also very intimately related with what I just talked about. Things like the abolition of sati, all right, things like the abolition of sati, things like the Widow Remarriage Act, all right. Now, these were merely, the reforming zeal of the British East India Company and its officer, all right, and the imposition of this reforming zeal over the native population. Of course, you will have to understand sati, and then you see exploitation of widows, or you see ostracization of widows. There is not a marker of a good society. But then of course this was you see a fundamental reality of Indian society. And what happens when you change this fundamental reality of Indian society, norms which people follow every day, day in and day out? What happens when you change them? You get a violent reaction. All right. Now here you can also talk about the acts of Christian missionaries who were spreading the Christian gospel in India, a land where people are deeply religious, and religiosity is part of the entire social fabric. All right. Now the spread of Christianity is also to play into the rise of resentment among people. All right, what does the spread of Christianity signify? The spread of Christianity signify, of course, the inferiority of Indian religions. All right, and this was the premise which legitimized spreading of Christianity in India. All right, in the eyes of the East India Company, that is the you see the inherent you see badness of Indian religiosity. All right, and of course such a notion is going to get a very violent reaction from this deeply religious society. All right, so now when we have discussed all of these three gradations of causes, the economic, the political and the social, we also may go on into a discussion of certain you see very general causes, very generic causes, all right, which are part of all of these three gradations of causalities. All right, these generic causes such as racialism, they are part of all of these three gradations, all right, of causes. They are part inherently of the British political ideology, which you see manifests itself in British political action in India. All right, the political ideology manifesting itself in political action causes all three gradations of problems, and the reaction is Revolt of 1857. We will talk about the generic, some of the generic causes now. Now, a very pertinent fact about British rule in India: it was predicated upon the idea of supremacy of the West. All right, it was predicated upon the epistemological certainty of the supremacy of the white European men. All right, it was predicated upon these ideas. All right, and what it generated was a queer kind of racialism, a racialism which was paternalistic. All right, that's why I'm talking about a queer kind of racialism, a racialism which was paternalistic. All right, they would highlight the inferiority of everything Indian, about the religion of India, about the socio-political systems of India, the economy of India. They would highlight the inferiority of all of these things, and then they would go about paternalistically, all right, very benevolently changing, all right, changing all of these systems. All right, these changes are what provoked the reaction, which is the Revolt of 1857. The idea of the European ideology of the supremacy of the West, all right, which comes down from the Enlightenment period up to the utilitarianism and then to liberal philosophy. All of these philosophical movements which provoked the idea, or which you see established the idea of the supremacy of the West and Western systems, all right, was the basis of racial discrimination in India, and that became the basis of changing India paternalistically. Of course, this paternalistic change was not received very well by Indians, and this was why. This was because this paternalistic change came from the overarching umbrella of racialism. When we talk about racialism, you must understand that Indians were not even allowed to be part of the higher administrative system of governing this nation. All right, Indians, if you were in the army, you would not be promoted above the rank of a subedar. All right, you will never, or you can never dream of becoming a commissioned officer, all right. You will always have to be non-commissioned, okay. And then of course within the army, talking about the army, other types of racialism, all right, was engendered into the fabric of the armed forces in India. That's why you can see that the final provocation came, the immediate provocation for the revolt of 1857 came from the army itself. We will talk about the immediate causes also, but remember, when we are talking about the causes, all of the causes are linked with the European ideology of racial superiority of the West and the Western man, all right. And now moving on into the immediate cause. When we talk about the immediate cause, maybe most of us are acquainted with the fact, the introduction of the Enfield rifle. Now, the Enfield rifle was a technological marvel of its time. Why? Because now you have got the ball, the wadding, and the powder, which has to go through the muzzle of the rifle in one package, all right. You do not have to carry the horn, you do not have to carry a separate wadding, you do not have to carry a separate ball. It's all within the one single cartridge, a package, all right. It significantly reduces the shooting time of that gun, all right. It's a technological marvel introduced in India, but then rumors started circulating that the cartridge itself, within which all of these paraphernalia were housed, the cartridge itself was greased with animal fat. What kind of animal? Cow and pig, all right. This directly played into the religious sentiments of the basic composition of the Bengal regiment. Why? Because the Bengal regiment was mostly hired from the Bengal region, and the people who were part, most of the sepoys were part of this Bengal infantry and the Bengal regiments, be it the infantry or the cavalry. They were either high caste Hindus or they were Muslims, all right. And for both of these social castes or social classes, these two animals, and consuming any part of these two animals was anathema. For the Hindus, the cow was sacred, and for the Muslims, the pig was considered as an impure animal, and therefore you can understand the reaction this introduction of the Enfield rifle provoked. Of course, on the 10th of May 1857, the Meerut regiment revolted. On the 11th of May, they reached Delhi. They announced the ascendancy of Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Emperor of India, and that is the beginning of the revolt of 1857. Now, don't think that before the 10th of May nothing happened, all right. Sepoy cantonments all across India, in such places as Allahabad, Agra, in Ambala, they had already started to deny the orders of their superior officers, of the English officers, all right. But remember, on the 10th of May, with the revolt of the Meerut garrison, the rebellion can be said to have started. Now, one neat trick of studying the causes of the revolt of 1857 is also to know the social class of the people who had revolted, all right. Now, when you are studying the revolt of 1857, most often you also have to remember the leaders of the revolt and the areas in which they were active. Now, remember where these leaders came from. Rani of Jhansi, she was the ruler of a native state, all right. She was the regent, not the ruler, but the regent of a native state. Kanwar Singh, he was a native zamindar, all right. And then the sepoys, they were part of the social fabric of India, all right. The sepoys were just men in arms and peasant in arms, all right. So everything that was happening in the countryside, the dispossession because of the British revenue settlements that was happening in the countryside, the sepoys were feeling it, all right. And the introduction of the Enfield rifle is just an opportunity which provides the final spark for that outbreak, all right. If you look at the people who revolted, you will come across the knowledge that from there itself you can find the causes, all right. Why would Rani of Jhansi revolt? Why would Kanwar Singh revolt? Why would the sepoys revolt, all right? You will find the answer to the causes in there itself, all right. So now we have dealt with the causes, not very, you can go even deeper into the causes of the revolt of 1857. We have given you a refresher on the causes of the revolt of 1857, but of course time is scarce, and we should also talk about the UPSC GS paper 1 question, which I promised that I will talk to you about. See, what the UPSC GS paper 1 question asked was that, in the previous 100 years, that is from 1757 to 1857, there had been numerous smaller rebellions, all right, smaller and larger. You can talk about the Santhal rebellion here, which was a tribal rebellion, and then there were many peasant rebellions, all right. The question asks, how is the revolt of 1857 a direct continuation or is linked, all right? How is the revolt of 1857 and all of these smaller or larger rebellions, they show a continuum, all right? How are they linked with each other? Now the answer is very simple. The answer is in the details, all right? That is the causality and the modality. If you want to answer that question and answer it in a very short form, talk about the causes. The causes for the small scale peasant or tribal uprisings were the same as the causes for the revolt of 1857, not the specific causes, but generally they were the same, all right. And about the modality, how were the smaller peasant or tribal uprisings conducted, and how were the larger revolt of 1857 and the rebellions in the revolt of 1857 were conducted. You will see such things as arson, attacks on the symbols of authority such as the Sarkar, Sahukar and the Zamindar nexus, all right. Sarkar, Sahukar and Zamindar. Well, what kind of people first come under attack from the rebels? People who represent the Sarkar, that is the British Raj, people who are of the money lending class, the Sahukar, and people who are of the Zamindari class, the new Zamindari, of course, all right, the Zamindari class, they are the people who are attacked first, and they are also symbolic of the British Raj or Company Bahadur's Raj, all right. This nexus is symbolic of the Company Bahadur's Raj, all right. If something is to be burnt during a rebellion, what would be burnt? Symbols, all right, symbols, all right, symbols of the exploitative government, courts, police stations, all right, houses of magistrates. These are the things that come under attack from arson, and these were the places that come under attack or come under fire during the revolt of 1857 and all other smaller peasant or tribal uprisings also. So in the modality also we see similarities, in the causality also we see similarities. So of course they must be connected with each other, right? So if you talk about if you talk briefly, keeping these 2 points in mind, you have answered the question, all right. This part, of course, we owe a debt to such great scholars of the subaltern school, but that is for another video, because if we talk about that we will have to go on and on, all right. So with that I would like to end my video today. I hope you learned something from my video and I hope it helps out in your examinations. So be prepared, and my advice to you for today is that whenever you are preparing for the prelims, do not think about preparing for prelims or mains, all right. Just think about how best it serves your purpose, all right, for the time being, okay. Because even if you are reading for prelims, it will serve you in mains, or even if you are reading in the mains perspective, it will serve you in prelims. So do not make much of a distinctions between perspectives. Just go about studying, just go about learning. I hope you have fun learning, okay. With that I take your leave. Thank you.